The assistant who was working the counter that afternoon said the man came in without announcing himself, which was not unusual. Most people who came into the shop came in without announcing themselves. They came through the door, they looked around, they found what they were looking for, or they didn't. The assistant had been working there for 2 years and had developed the specific attentiveness of someone whose job required distinguishing between browsers and buyers, between people who needed help and people who needed to be left alone. She assessed people quickly, not unkindly, and she had learned to read the quality of attention that someone brought to the instruments as a reliable indicator of how to respond to them. The man who came in that afternoon brought a quality of attention to the instruments that she had not seen before. Not enthusiasm. Enthusiasm was common. Guitarists were enthusiastic people by nature, and the enthusiasm of someone in a guitar shop was so standard as to be unremarkable. This was different from enthusiasm. This was the quality of attention of someone for whom the instruments were not objects of desire, but objects of relationship. Someone who was looking at them the way you look at things you already understand, assessing them in terms that were not available to someone who had not spent a significant portion of their life developing an understanding of what guitars were. He moved through the shop quietly. He looked at the acoustics near the door. He moved to the electrics along the back wall. He stopped in front of a display that held a row of vintage instruments, guitars that the shop had acquired over the previous several years, and that occupied a separate category from the production models, both in terms of price and in terms of the care that the shop's owner applied to their management. The owner was protective of these instruments in a way that was not unreasonable, given what they were worth and what their condition represented. He had spent 12 years acquiring them through auctions and private sales, and a sustained correspondence with collectors in America and Europe, had developed the specific expertise that allows someone to distinguish an instrument worth acquiring from an instrument that is merely old, and had arrived at a collection of which the vintage wall was the part he was most proud of and most careful about. He applied his policy. No customer handled the vintage instruments without specific approval, not from hostility, but from the specific caution of someone who has spent 12 years building something irreplaceable, and who has decided that the risk of giving offense is preferable to the risk of allowing something irreplaceable to be damaged in an unguarded moment. The man was looking at a guitar on the vintage display. He had his hands behind his back, the specific body language of someone who is observing something valuable and is being careful about what his hands communicate. His head was slightly tilted. He was reading the instrument in the way you read something you know how to read. Not the label, not the price, but the instrument itself. He reached up and took it down. The owner came out of the back room at that moment. He saw the man with the guitar. He crossed the shop. "Put that back," he said, in the tone of someone applying a policy, not issuing a threat. The guitar was a 1959 Les Paul Standard, the instrument that occupied a singular position in the history of the electric guitar. Produced in limited numbers before Gibson discontinued the model in 1960. Rediscovered by the British guitarists of the 1960s, who understood what its specific characteristics, the mahogany body, the maple top, the PAF humbucking pickups, the particular construction details of that specific year, could do in the context of the music they were making. By the mid-1970s, one of the most sought-after and most valuable electric guitars in existence. Not because of what it symbolized, because of what it actually was. The owner had a procedure for who handled instruments of this category, and it involved more than an unremarkable customer in a plain coat asking politely. The man was looking at a guitar on the vintage display. He had his hands behind his back, which she noticed and registered as the specific body language of someone who is observing something valuable and is being careful about the implicit message of their hands. His head was slightly tilted. He was reading the instrument, not the label, not the price tag, but the instrument itself, the way you read something you know how to read. He reached up and took it down. The owner came out of the back room at that moment, the specific timing of coincidence that determines how things go. He saw the man with the guitar. He crossed the shop. "Put that back," he said, not rudely, not aggressively, in the tone of someone who has a policy and is applying it to a situation that requires application. The guitar was a vintage instrument of considerable value. The man was, as far as the owner could see, an unremarkable customer in a plain dark coat, without any visible credential that would indicate he should be given access to an instrument of this category. The policy existed for reasons. The policy was being applied. The man looked at the owner. He looked at the guitar in his hands. He said nothing. He set the guitar back on the wall hook. He stood in front of it for a moment. His hands were behind his back again. He looked at the instrument the way he had been looking at it before, with the reading quality, the relational quality, the quality that the assistant had noticed when he first walked in, and that the owner, in the speed of applying the policy, had not yet processed. And the man said, "May I try it?" The owner looked at him. The guitar was a 1959 Les Paul Standard, the specific instrument that occupied a singular position in the history of the electric guitar, that had been produced in numbers that were limited even at the time, and that had, by the mid-1970s, acquired a value and a significance that made it an object of exceptional care. The owner had a procedure for who tried instruments of this category, and it involved more than an unremarkable customer in a plain coat asking politely. He said, "I'd need to know a bit more about you first." The man looked at him. He looked at the assistant, who was watching from the counter. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He produced a card, not a business card in the ordinary sense, but something smaller, something that the owner took and looked at, and then looked up from. His expression changed. He said, "I'm sorry, I didn't." The man said, "It's all right." He nodded toward the guitar. The owner took the guitar down himself this time. He handed it to the man with the specific quality of deference that arrives when a significant error in assessment has been corrected suddenly. The man took it. He sat down on the stool beside the amplifier that the shop kept for customers to test instruments. He plugged the guitar in. He adjusted the volume to a level that was present, but not overwhelming. He tuned the guitar by ear. 4 adjustments, precise, done in approximately 20 seconds, and played a chord. He played for 14 minutes. The assistant, who had been at the counter when the owner came out of the back room, was still at the counter when the 14 minutes ended. She had not done anything in those 14 minutes except listen. She had been in the process of entering an inventory item into the log when the playing began, and the pen was on the page and the entry was unfinished, and she had not moved. She said afterward that she had not been aware of the specific moment she stopped working, only of the specific moment the playing ended, and she became aware that she was standing with a pen above an unfinished inventory entry and did not know how long she had been standing that way. What Paige played in those 14 minutes was not a demonstration. It was not a performance in the sense of something offered to an audience. He was playing the guitar, playing it in the specific way of someone testing an instrument, yes, but the testing had a quality that exceeded what testing usually looks like, that was simultaneously assessment and expression, that used the specific characteristics of this specific guitar in this specific condition to produce something that could only be produced by this specific guitar played by hands that understood it at this specific level. The 1959 Les Paul Standard had a character, a tone, a response, a relationship between its specific construction and the sounds it was capable of producing that had been the subject of considerable discussion among guitarists and collectors and acoustic engineers, the subject of attempts at documentation and replication and analysis. In 14 minutes, on a stool in a guitar shop, Paige played through that character completely, not demonstrating it to the people in the room, but engaging with it, finding its edges, discovering what it would and would not do, developing a picture of the instrument in real time through the instrument itself. The owner stood behind the counter, where he had positioned himself when he handed Paige the guitar, and he did not move from that position for the 14 minutes. A customer came into the shop approximately 4 minutes into the playing. He opened the door, stepped inside, looked at the man on the stool playing the guitar, and did not come further into the shop. He stood just inside the door for approximately 8 minutes. He left when Paige set the guitar down, without having looked at any instrument, without having spoken to anyone. He had come in to look at a bass guitar in the window. He did not look at it. He stood inside the door and listened to 14 minutes of a 1959 Les Paul Standard being played by someone who understood what it was, and then he left. He came back the following day, looked at the bass guitar, and bought it. He told the assistant when he was paying that he had been here the day before, but had gotten distracted. When Paige finished, he sat for a moment with the guitar across his lap. He looked at the neck, the body. He turned it over and looked at the back. He looked at the headstock. He set it on his knee, horizontal, and looked at the top. He said, "What are you asking for it?" The owner told him. Paige nodded. He did not negotiate. He did not question the figure. He sat with it for a moment. The specific consideration of someone who has already made the decision and is allowing a reasonable interval before stating it. He said, "I'll take it." The owner wrote the receipt. His hands were not entirely steady writing the receipt, which the assistant noticed, and which was consistent, she thought, with the specific condition of someone who has applied a policy incorrectly to someone who should not have been subject to it, and who was experiencing the aftermath of the correction. He wrote the receipt. He packaged the guitar with the care that an instrument of this category required. He handed it to Paige. Paige took the guitar. He said thank you. He said it to the owner, and he said it separately to the assistant, which was the thing she remembered longest from the afternoon. Not the playing, not the moment the owner said put that back, not the 14 minutes of the shop going quiet. The specific quality of the thank you directed at her. Not performed, not polite in the professional sense, simply genuine, in the way of someone who has noticed that she was in the room and is acknowledging it. The assistant stood at the counter for a moment after he left. The pen was still in her hand. The inventory entry was still unfinished on the page. The shop had the specific quality of quiet that follows when something has been present in a room and is no longer present. The owner said nothing for a while. He went back into the back room. He came out 20 minutes later with the coffee he had been making when the man first came in. He had been making coffee when the man came through the door, and had left it to come out when he saw the guitar being taken from the wall, and had gone back to finish making it after Paige left, and now he was drinking it. He set a second cup on the counter for the assistant. She asked if he wanted to talk about it. He said, no. Today, the 1959 Les Paul Standard that Jimmy Page purchased on that afternoon in the mid-1970s is, depending on which account of the provenance you consult, either in a specific collection or not publicly known, or among a category of instruments whose current location is a matter of careful privacy. The guitar existed before Page played it in that shop, and it continues to exist. What happened in the 14 minutes between the two is not in any official record of the purchase. It exists in the account of the assistant who was standing at the counter and did not finish her inventory entry, and in whatever the owner carries from the afternoon that he did not want to talk about, and in the memory of the customer who came through the door 4 minutes in and stood for 8 minutes and left without doing what he came to do. The guitar played 14 minutes on a stool in a guitar shop in London in the mid-1970s. Nobody who was there will say they are glad the owner said put that back. Nobody who was there will say they are sorry he said it either, because what followed required the guitar to be on the wall and the instruction to be given, and the correction to happen in the specific sequence that it happened. And the sequence is what produced the 14 minutes. And the 14 minutes are what they were. The sound of someone playing an instrument they understood completely, in a room of people who did not initially understand who was playing, which turned out to be the only condition under which the playing could have happened in exactly the way it happened. If the owner had recognized Paige at the door, the guitar would have been taken down immediately. Paige would have been welcomed, encouraged, given whatever access he wanted, and the 14 minutes would have been something different, something performed for recognition rather than played in the absence of it. The put that back was, in the end, the thing that made the music what it was. If this story of what happens when the wrong instruction produces the right result moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. We share these stories every week. And tell us in the comments, has someone ever underestimated you in a way that ended up being the best thing that could have happened? Drop it below. We read every single one.